Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com, and I'm here with
Dr. Howie Jacobson of AskHowie.com.
And neither of us are medical doctors. We're the PhD type. So today, Howie, I've got a quote by George F. Kennan, which says, "The truth is a poor competitor in the marketplace of ideas." The truth is a poor competitor in the marketplace of ideas. And I'd like to give you a little explanation about why I selected that quote to help us with healthy eating and hear what you have to say. I think this is right up your alley, actually.
I used to play tennis with his great nephew.
Really?
Yeah.
Then it's really up your alley. I think you wrote a whole book about this underlying concept. So there's a lot of confusion in the culture about healthy diet, particularly because people really want good news about their bad habits, as Howard Jacobson, PhD, likes to say. That said, it requires at least some higher education and research methodology to understand how to evaluate a study. As a consequence, it's really easy for marketers to deliver believable good news about your bad habits. But here are some principles to keep in mind. Big studies are better than little studies. Look primarily at research done on tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people. Principle number 2, long-term studies are better than short-term studies. There are certain illnesses, diseases, and outcomes that take decades to occur. 3, studies funded by a group with a vested interest, such as Big Food or Big Pharma, must be evaluated with an extra critical eye. 4, hard outcomes are better than soft outcomes. While it's good to measure changes in markers like cholesterol, A1C, etc., it's more valuable to measure actual cardiovascular or diabetic life events. There's really no such thing as a wake-up skinny pill. The sad truth is that nothing besides whole natural food is actually quote-unquote good for you. But whatever you believe, the less processed food you eat, the more whole natural foods will stimulate your taste buds and pleasure centers. The truth is a poor competitor in the marketplace of ideas. So I'm really kind of paraphrasing you from your book Whole, and I guess a little bit from Sick to Fit, right? But I thought I'd give you a chance to expound on this and get your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I appreciate the attribution of good news about your bad habits, and I have to punt it somewhere down the line. I think I might have heard it first from Dr. John McDougall.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll fix that going forward.
He heard it somewhere too, I'm sure. It's probably like the 17th commandment, the one that, that dropped and we never found out about. Thou shalt not listen to good news about thy bad habits.
Thou shalt not wear dirty sneakers. Okay, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have to sing you my Black Sox song afterwards.
Okay.
But not now. Maybe that could be like a bonus for people who sign up.
You have to go look up Dogs Like Socks by Psycho Stick afterwards, but go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to remember that because I don't want to take time to write it
Just
down.
because we're talking about sock songs.
Yeah.
This is entirely irrelevant.
I know, but we're trying to tell the truth, which is a poor competitor in the marketplace of ideas.
That's true, so just lay it all out there, man.
Make it, entertaining and saucy.
The truth is that we both get stuck on silly points sometimes.
There are a bunch of reasons, like fundamental reasons why the truth tends to lose out. And some of them are just brains. Like, we have a bias towards the novel and the counterintuitive. And social media has reinforced that into, a huge screaming bias towards anything that seems odd or weird. So like if you want to write a clickbait headline, it shouldn't include something like broccoli is good for you.
Right.
Like bacon is the fountain of youth. Now, people are going to click on that because it's new, it's different. And the brain is always biased towards new and different because that's really useful for survival.
And it's good news about their bad habits.
Yeah, and it happens to be, right? Because good news about their bad habits is almost always false and not what you've been taught, right? There's a reason like grandma was right, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
when you look at the amount of money spent on marketing junk food versus fruits and vegetables, it's a homeopathic amount spent on healthy food.
I actually looked at those numbers and I think it was something like, well, I looked at the size of the industries, and the processed foods like bags, boxes, and containers industry is somewhere around $7 trillion, and the produce market is more like 50 billion, something like that. I don't have the exact numbers. I suppose I should before I quote them, but it's on that order of magnitude and in that proportion. It's really scary.
Yeah, and it's that way because of the way the system is set up, right? The more money you make from your products, the more you can spend on advertising. It was true from our stint in internet marketing. It's true for our businesses today. Another thing is that big, long studies, a hard outcome study requires a long time, right? Because you can change your cholesterol in 3 days. And I've seen this. I've seen people that go on, radically different diets than the one they'd been eating, much healthier. And 3 to 4 to 5 days later, they can have a radically different lipid panel. So to look at those hard outcomes, you need years or decades. And those studies are very hard to fund, right? They're very expensive. And researchers don't want to make that kind of bet, right? Because you're going to spend 20 years, you're not sure that if the grant is going to be renewed. If you do come out with the results, the industry that funds science is not going to be interested because there's very little money involved. So if you're doing something that somebody thinks they can turn into a patentable, profitable, protected product, then it's much easier to get funding for it. So there's a lot of structural reasons, starting with our brains and continuing into the structure of the economy and the way academia relies on it. That means it's highly unlikely that what comes out of the fire hose of social media or even traditional media will resemble truth. So what do we do about it? I think one thing is sort of common sense. So you think about the claim. If this were true, would you and I be here today? So I talked about that a lot with people need to combine proteins, right? If that were true, human beings would have died out a long time ago, right? Because protein is so darn important. It's like telling people they need to breathe a certain type of oxygen at a certain time of day. Like, oh, if it's that hard, we're all dead.
Yeah. I always wonder where all the people with protein deficiencies are, if protein is really that important.
Right. And there's evidence, and I've seen evidence that you might be a little suboptimal with protein. So I don't want to be like telling people.
No, especially at older ages, especially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're not medical doctors or nutritionists, so.
Right. Why are we making such a big deal out of it? First of all, you say like follow the money. Who's got a financial incentive to create this story? If you can't find one, I was a history major. We would always look at things and say, what's probably true? The thing that got written down. If the person writing it down, if that was inconvenient for them and they wrote it down anyway, then it's probably true.
Gotcha.
So we're kind of just doing, a little bit of detective work. If that person says, yes, I was in town the day of the murder, they probably were.
Mm-hmm. It's a damaging admission against self-interest.
Yes. Another thing is, if we didn't have science, if we just were looking at people, if you didn't know anything, if the internet went away, if every opinion went away, and you were charged with figuring out the healthiest way to eat, and you didn't have a lab, and you didn't have money to try experiments, let's say aliens landed on Earth, and they're like, I wonder what's the best thing to feed humans to keep them healthy.
Mm-hmm.
How would they go about it? They would probably look around and say, well, who looks good? What diets are people doing that are good for them? It's messy because there's lots of confounding factors, right? People who eat healthy diets also tend to walk more and be outdoors more and be social more. and be farther away from technologies and pollution and have closer family ties and all that. And they might have different genes. So it's not sort of a gold standard study the way you would do like a drug trial and try to eliminate all variability between the two groups except for the one thing you're studying.
Isolate the variable, right?
Yeah, but instead, you just said common sense, like, oh, those people look pretty healthy. There's a lot of them living to 90 and 100 and still functioning well. Maybe until we really know absolutely the truth, maybe the best bet is to just eat like them.
Mm-hmm. Another question that I've heard, this comes from Natural Hygiene. They say, would you feed it to a baby? Could a baby make a meal out of it? Would you feed it to a baby? And that's kind of a gut check for, is this something that probably belongs in my body or not?
Would you feed it to your pet or the equivalent?
My pet would eat anything.
Yeah. Yeah, but would you?
Would I feed it to him? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. I mean, I see people, they're only going to get, the $90 bag of dog food that's all natural and organic, and, and they'll go out and eat utter garbage.
Yeah.
Or you wouldn't treat your car that way. I know this ice cream sundae with chocolate syrup and wet nuts and a maraschino cherry on top isn't good for me, but I know this low octane, dirty leaded fuel is not good for my diesel engine, but just this once.
Yeah, right. The other thing is you can look for scientists who speak in the nutritional field who you've seen reverse their position based upon new data, who seem to follow these principles, because I studied research methodology for 9 years, essentially, between college and graduate school. I ran a research business, and so it was kind of my business to figure out what's a good study and what's a bad study. But the vast majority of the population just doesn't have that understanding. And even when you boil it down to these 4 simple principles, you still have to do some digging to figure out whether it's a good study or a bad study. But there are people out there, there are professionals out there who seem to stick to these principles in their reporting. I like Dr. Furman is one of them, but there are others. And what are the conclusions that they come to when they assimilate the data from the strongest studies and deprioritize the ones that have questionable principles behind them? That can be a way of getting through the mess out there and trying to get to the truth also.
Yeah. I used to follow the people I thought were sort of the most charismatic. That led me into trouble because there was one point where I was listening to 2 very charismatic, intelligent people who were disagreed with each other. And so my brain exploded. So now I look for, first of all, no ad hominem attacks, right? No personal attacks. We're just talking about the data. So I'm looking for people who don't like freak out and yell and scream and get angry when their ideas are challenged. And second, I'm looking for people who are actively searching for contradictory evidence.
Yes.
Not just to debunk it, but to maybe debunk themselves. I'm looking for someone who says, I want the truth, and if I'm wrong, I want to know.
A true commitment to science is a commitment to the evolution of the dialogue and the unfolding truth. And you want to contribute to that dialogue and you want to be a part of that evolution, but you don't have to have your answers be the ultimate answers.
Yeah. When people would talk to me about now we know exactly what to eat, based on science. Say, well, the history of science is the history of being wrong. But there's this idea that, well, we finally got it. We can think about how could people believe that 100 years ago? You think there's stuff that we believe now that they're not going to say that about in 100 years?
Right. And knowledge tends to be contextual also. And the more you find broader context and environments where you're trying to apply it, you find wrinkles about how your theories don't really work. Like the Newtonian theory of gravity turned out to be incomplete when you start to approximate the speed of light. And there are, I'm thinking of another example right now, but something that seems absolutely true in all circumstances probably is not.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.